Excellencies, distinguished guests, on behalf of the Permanent Mission of India, I would like to welcome all of you for joining us today at this annual event to commemorate the International Day of Non-Violence here at the United Nations. Before we begin, allow me to welcome the dignitaries on the dais today. We are privileged to have amidst us the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, our chief guest who will be delivering the keynote address. We are honored to have His Excellency Ambassador John Ash, President of the United Nations General Assembly. Thank you, Mr. President, for joining us and agreeing to deliver the presidential address. And we have my dear colleague, the prominent representative of South Africa, Ambassador Kingsley Mamabolo, who is in many ways a co-sponsor of this event, given the fact that Mahatma Gandhi spent his formative years as a political activist using the tools of non-violence in South Africa before returning to India to lead the Indian freedom struggle. We also have amidst us Mr. Peter Lonsky-Tiefenthal, Under Secretary General for Communications and Public Information. We are honored to have amongst us today one of India's greatest artists and perhaps the world's greatest exponent of the Sarod, Ustad Amjad Ali Khan Sahab, and his sons Aman and Ayan. We would be privileged to listen to a special recital by them to mark this day during the latter half of our function. I would like to share with you that we have received a special message on this occasion from Mrs. Tara Gandhi Bhattacharjee, the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, who has asked that we spend a moment to introspect on the message of non-violence spread by the Mahatma on the occasion of the United Nations Day of Non-Violence. May I, distinguished guests, therefore request you to observe a minute's silence for introspection. With our meeting in context, we would invite you to watch a short film chronicling the defining timelines in the life of Mahatma Gandhi. Could we have the audio visual, please?
This man's dream was inspired by another man's dream, who too had lived and died to liberate his fellow beings from injustice and exploitation. This was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, a frail man who galvanized millions and, unleashing the miraculous force of non-violence, brought the mightiest empire the world has known to its knees. More than 1 billion Indians revere him as the father of their nation. The world acknowledges him as an apostle of peace. Gandhi dreamt of wiping every tear from every eye and strove to reach out to the last, faceless, suffering man. As a young student in England, Gandhi was drawn to the great religious works, the Bible, the Holy Quran, and the Gita, inspired him equally. As a youth, Mohandas encountered great minds of the West, Thoreau, Emerson, and Count Tolstoy. He carried on a stimulating correspondence with the Russian Tsar. Gandhi was a struggling lawyer in South Africa when, after experiencing personal humiliation and racist violence, he took the vow to fight against oppression with all his might. What made Gandhi unique was his commitment to non-violence. Although he led many a historic political battle, he was essentially a religious man. The God he worshipped was truth, and serving humanity was his religion. For him, the moral and the ethical were supreme. He found a kindred soul in Nobel laureate poet Rabindranath Tagore. The poet shared with him common concerns about India's independence and the future of mankind. Later, he struck a friendship with the visionary writer Romain Rolland, During his sojourn in Europe in the 1930s, Gandhi spent hours with him, discussing the crisis of civilization that loomed large. He also had stimulating meetings with other leading minds of his time. Those were turbulent times. The world, still recovering from the devastation of war, was threatened by brute forces of tyranny. The atom bomb cast a horrible shadow of terrible annihilation. The partition of India that followed in the wake of independence resulted in unprecedented carnage and rendered millions refugees. All that Gandhi had worked for seemed to be lying in ruins. Gandhi refused to despair and give up. He became even stronger in his resolve to fight the forces of darkness. He walked alone on perilous paths, heedless of personal safety, where few dared to follow in his footsteps. More than 6 decades have passed since Gandhi breathed his last, but his presence is still palpable. He lives in the hearts of all those who have taken up cudgels against oppression, exploitation, and injustice.
Man like Mahatma Gandhi, who started his political career in South Africa, and that of course has established his historical and emotional ties between our story and that of India.
Gandhi once said, "My life is my message." The message remains relevant. Exploitation of man by man has not ceased. Wars and violence continue to scar innocent victims. To douse raging fires and to find our way through toxic smoke, we need Gandhi as our guide. His legacy is immortal. There will never be a dearth of people who will dream similar dreams. The light Gandhi showed will continue to shine and guide humanity for generations.
Honorable President of the General Assembly, distinguished Secretary General and friends, you will recall that it was on 27 June 2007, at its 103rd plenary meeting during the 61st session of the UNGA, that the General Assembly acted on India's proposal to adopt Resolution 61/271. This resolution declared October 2nd, the birth date of Mahatma Gandhi, as the International Day of Nonviolence to be commemorated annually at the United Nations. Since then, eminent persons have participated in this event, including the chairperson of the ruling United Progressive Alliance from India, Srimati Sonia Gandhi, who was here for our inaugural event, and the Foreign Minister of India, who was here last year. In 2009, the UN Postal Administration issued a commemorative stamp on Mahatma Gandhi. Since the genesis of our event is Resolution 61/271, we would like to recall that the International Day of Nonviolence is celebrated, and I quote, bearing in mind that nonviolence, tolerance, full respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, democracy, development, mutual understanding and respect for diversity are interlinked and mutually reinforcing. Reaffirming the universal relevance of the principle of nonviolence and desiring to secure a culture of peace, tolerance, understanding and nonviolence. Unquote. On this occasion, we would like to recall the singular contribution made to the cause of world peace and development by the philosophy of nonviolence. Indeed, since it promotes dialogue and understanding, nonviolence has established itself as a major instrument of policy, whether it be to address and resolve armed conflict, or to provide the framework for growth and development, or indeed to form the glue which binds humanity together regardless of our many diversities. I would dare suggest, in the presence of this distinguished audience, that the path of nonviolence and dialogue is the surest path to sustainable peace, sustainable development, and indeed sustainable reforms. It is through such an approach that we will be best equipped to deal with the challenges of change, whether political, social, economic, or environmental, and find solutions on the basis of the strength of such a dialogue. The dynamism and vibrancy of the societies in which Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Nelson Mandela have lived and worked is proof if indeed such proof were required of this. Distinguished guests, allow me to invite our chief guest, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations, to deliver the keynote address. Excellency, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Ashok Kumar Mukherjee, Permanent Representative of India, Your Excellency, Ambassador John Ash, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency, Kingsley Mamabolo, Permanent Representative of South Africa, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. Today we celebrate the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, a global giant for justice, respect for diversity, and fundamental human rights. His legacy of non-violence still resonates. Gandhi showed the power of peacefully opposing oppression, injustice, and hatred. His example has inspired many other history makers such as Martin Luther King Jr., Václav Havel, Rigoberta Menchú, and Nelson Mandela. The message to each of us is to champion human dignity and reject intolerance. We must work for a world where people of all cultures and beliefs live together in mutual respect and full equality. Non-violence does not mean non-action. It takes courage to stand up to those who use violence to enforce their will or beliefs. It requires resolve to face down injustice, discrimination, and brutality. It takes strength to move from conflict to peaceful negotiation. Some of history's greatest leaders rejected the battleground for the negotiating table. Durable peace cannot be won through force of arms. That is why I have insisted throughout the war in Syria that all concerned must work for a political solution. That includes the parties and those who can influence them. Whatever one's sympathies or convictions, violence is a poor means to an unsatisfactory end. As Gandhi said, and I quote, "I object to violence because when it appears to the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent." End of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, violence can be contagious, but so can peaceful dialogue. The United Nations stands for the peaceful resolution of disputes and the end to all forms of violence, whether state-sponsored or embedded in culture and practice. This includes the systemic violence and intimidation that women and girls endure in all regions. Ending such violence starts with each of us, in homes and schools, workplaces and communities. The United Nations is also focused on ending poverty in a generation. As Gandhi reminded us, poverty is inherently violent to the needs and aspirations of the world's most vulnerable people. That is why we place much emphasis on fulfilling the promise of the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. It is why we are working to set a new development agenda with the poverty at its core and sustainable development at its guide. As its guide, with the growing populations and increasing pressures on resources, we need also to be aware of the violence we inflict on the natural world. As we set sights on a sustainable future, we must be guided by the imperative to do no harm to people or the planet. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, non-violence needs leaders across nations and in communities and homes. And it needs to be backed by an army of brave people prepared to demand peace, freedom, and fairness. On this International Day of Non-Violence, let us draw strength from the courage of individuals like Mahatma Gandhi. Let us send a message far and wide. Turn your back on division and hatred. Stand up for what is right. Work together for a world of lasting justice peace and prosperity for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for an extremely insightful and very pertinent address on why Mahatma Gandhi is so relevant in today's world. It is, of course, not a secret that the distinguished President of our 68th General Assembly has a very personal link with the land of Mahatma Gandhi, since his charming wife was born in India. We could not have, therefore, had a more appropriate speaker to deliver the presidential address today. May I now invite the distinguished President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Ambassador John Ash, to deliver the presidential address. The floor is yours, please.
Ambassador Mukherjee, Ambassador Mamabolo, Excellencies, Secretary General, and senior members of the team, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On this day, when we in the international community observe the International Day of Nonviolence, I am deeply honored to be here with you on this occasion that promotes the universal relevance of the principle of nonviolence and the values of peace, tolerance, and understanding. We celebrate this day, which is the birthday of one of history's greatest advocates of nonviolence, Mahatma Gandhi, who proved through the example of his life that the moral and spiritual power of nonviolence is far greater than any form of physical force or human brutality. Gandhi Jayanti, as this day is known in India, is a unique opportunity for all of us to reflect upon the fact that Gandhi's firm belief in the value of non-violence transcends borders and, I dare say, even time. What is so remarkable to so many across the world is that Gandhiji's fundamental and unshakable belief that nonviolence was the strongest force for change in the world permeates across generations, culture, and religious boundaries. In fact, his legacy of thought and action is as relevant today as a beacon of hope in our troubled times to the men, women, and children living under all forms of oppression, as it was to the men, women, and children who embarked on the civil rights struggle in this, our host country. When Gandhi wrote in 1947 that, and I quote, "The nonviolence of the strong is the strongest force in the world," and that, and I quote, "there is no hope for the aching world except through the narrow and straight path of nonviolence," end quote, the most valuable lesson that we all learned was to persevere for a peaceful resolution to conflicts, even if the odds were against us. We learned through the legacy of Gandhi that even in the face of extreme injustice, acts of violence cannot lead to true and lasting peace. For Gandhi, the practice of non-violence, or ahimsa, in the widest sense, means a willingness to treat all beings as oneself and engage in selfless actions. We learn through his life and his actions the intrinsic value and worth of the practice of ahimsa. We learned that nonviolence was the means by which individuals and nations could live. And it is this idea and this message that has deep significance and resonance because it is closely connected to the tenets of the United Nations Charter. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the ideas that are central to the UN's founding, ensuring peace and security and improving human well-being, are still central to our shared human global journey and what each of us must work together to support. The path of nonviolence is guided by our broader desire and yearning for peaceful measures for settling disputes, human rights, and guaranteeing fundamental freedoms for all. History favors the interwoven path of peace and nonviolence, which has stood the test of time and continues to inspire humankind. Those who have succeeded in reaching their aims through peaceful means in the face of overwhelming obstacles are those whom we remember, revere, and aspire to emulate, both men and women, including Mahatma Gandhi himself, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and Aung San Suu Kyi. We are here to honor the virtues of nonviolence in a world beset by violence in its many grueling manifestations. We are bombarded with news reports of wars, civil and sectarian bloodshed and strife, poverty and malnutrition, environmental degradation, and violence against women, youth, and other vulnerable members of society. Around the world, citizens live under threats of intimidation and aggression. But we also cannot consign millions of families and communities to eke out a living in the dark without access to clean water, adequate food, and safe sanitation services. At the dawn of our millennium, the leaders of the world came together here in this city and adopted 8 goals to guide the world to a better tomorrow in areas such as reducing poverty and hunger, child mortality and disease burden, increasing primary education enrollment, improving gender equality and maternal health, and ensuring environmental sustainability. These goals, known as the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, created a sense of momentum and optimism, uniting governments, private sector, and civil society from all parts of the world around a global anti-poverty movement with one focused set of targets. Throughout the past 13 years, we have seen significant and admirable progress in meeting the targets, such as halving extreme poverty, putting more children in primary school, and reducing deaths from HIV/AIDS and other diseases. However, progress around the world has been uneven, both within and among nations. More than 1 billion people still suffer from extreme poverty. Many go to bed hungry from the day before, and many live in conflict-ridden areas and are also fearful of the fresh horrors that the next morning will bring. The deadline for the MDGs is upon us in 2015, and we in the international community are now beginning to shape a new agenda for the post-2015 era, one that applies to all countries of the world and one which responds to climate change, preserves our forests and oceans, creates systems of justice within our societies, provides access to clean water and sanitation services. Arguably, this may be the boldest and most ambitious and most collaborative project that the United Nations have ever had to undertake, and our Assembly of Nations will need to be equally audacious, ambitious, and collaborative if we are to rise up to the task we have chosen for ourselves. Excellencies, laying the groundwork for this new agenda is laying the groundwork for a non-violent world, one that values peace and the well-being for all. Regardless of our circumstances, it is the right of all people to live in a peaceful world free of all forms of violence. I would posit that the path of nonviolence belongs to all of us. It speaks to the kind of society and world in which we all want to live. This is why in the 68th session of the General Assembly, we will have a focused thematic debate that will directly address the issue of ensuring peaceful and stable societies in the post-2015 development agenda, precisely because of the absolutely crippling effect war and terrorism and conflict have on development. These countries, those countries that are perpetually locked in a cycle of violence, are most vulnerable and in need of attention, support, and fresh ideas. In those countries, the price of violence is paid in scars and on the psyche of generations of young people, of those forced to live in fear of their neighbor, in the loss of people in their most productive and creative years, in the spiraling course of care and the erosion of development prospects. The path of nonviolence is not only about transforming the global, but the personal. And Mahatma Gandhi reminded us that it is this path that is for the courageous and not the fearful. It is an option that is available to each one of us in how we relate to each other and respond to injustice. We are responsible for employing the tools of nonviolence and thereby helping to create a more peaceful world for all. For it is only when we truly call and accept all as one and recognize that violence equally diminishes those who are violent and those who are victims of violence, that non-violence becomes the moral imperative. I would like to thank the Permanent Mission of India for the portrait you see at the back here, which I'm told is to be mounted in the office of the President of the General Assembly. It is one that I will look at daily for inspiration. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ash. That was a really interesting, profound message that you conveyed, and we are inspired by your words. Friends, when Mahatma Gandhi, as you saw in the short film that we screened earlier, was evicted from a moving train at Pietermaritzburg station in South Africa for being a non-white on the 7th of June 1893, a spark was lit which was to change the course of world history and espouse an ideal that we have all gathered to celebrate here today. The movement for freedom in South Africa was deeply influenced by this event. Let me now turn to my distinguished colleague from South Africa, himself a participant in South Africa's freedom struggle, to address us. Ambassador Kingsley Mambokole, you have the floor, sir. A person and permanent representative of India, my friend Ashok, our chief guest, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Ambassador John Ash, President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this annual event to commemorate October 2 on the International Day of Nonviolence is a fitting testimony to the life and spirit of Mahatma Gandhi. It is also a testimony to Gandhi's contribution to world peace through the historical impact on his motherland, India, and my own country, South Africa. South Africa attaches great importance to this annual event. We see this as a necessary beacon for the international community of what is possible through strong moral and just leadership that Gandhi provided and his contribution to global peace. The role of Mahatma Gandhi in influencing the course of events and shared history to our two nations, India and South Africa, makes this an additional honor for my country to be associated with this event today. I wish to share with you a brief insight on how President Mandela, in his own words, viewed Gandhi's involvement in the then apartheid state. And I quote, Gandhi arrived in South Africa in 1893 at the age of 23. Within a week, he collided head-on with racism. His immediate response was to flee the country that so degraded people of color. But then his inner resilience overpowered him with a sense of mission, and he stayed to redeem the dignity of the racially exploited, to pave the way for the liberation of the colonized world over the develop a blueprint for a new social order. He left 21 years later, a near Mahatma. I'm told that means great soul. There is no doubt in my mind that by the time he was violently removed from our world, he had transited into that state. He was no ordinary leader. There are those who believe he was divinely inspired, and it is difficult not to believe with them. He dared to exhort non-violence in a time when the violence of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had exploded
exploded on us. He exhorted morality with science, technology, and the capitalist order that has made it redundant. He replaced self-interest with group interest without minimizing the importance of self. In fact, the interdependence of the social and the personal is at the heart of his philosophy. He seeks the simultaneous and interactive development of the moral person and the moral society, unquote. Your Excellencies, this day reminds us, the international community, that there is a need in today's world for a leadership that embraces the values of the common good for all mankind. Respect, tolerance, dignity, liberty, justice, equality, and fair play. Gather momentum in the absence of these values of peace, truth, righteousness, and nonviolence that were espoused by Mahatma Gandhi. This practice of belief in the common good of all mankind, respect, tolerance, dignity, and liberty are characteristics that continue to inspire millions around the world. On the 21st of September this year, my Minister of International Relations and Cooperation unveiled a statue of Nelson Mandela at the South African Embassy in Washington, D.C. The project was well received by ordinary U.S. citizens who view it as a completion of the golden triangle of the civil rights movement, encompassing the statues of Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela. The international community must learn from this day and the attributes of the Mahatma in search of this elusive but attainable goal of a safer and a peaceful world. Through nonviolence, Gandhi taught us that strength does not come from physical capacity, it comes from an indomitable will. I thank you. I would like to thank my dear brother and colleague, Ambassador Kingsley Mamabolo, for his remarks, which have enriched us. I now have a request from the floor for brief interventions. I would like to recognize the distinguished Ambassador of Argentina. Madam, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, dear friends, excellencies, Mr. Secretary General. Today, the International Day of Nonviolence, we evoke the values of non-possession and equability, the force of true and life, and the power of nonviolence. Between 1915 and 1941, Mahatma Gandhi exchanged beautiful and intense letters with the Indian poet and philosopher Rabindranath Tagore. These letters are not a mere exchange of letters, but an intimate and deep dialogue, a real dialogue, where mutual respect builds the ethical and political basis to make possible to agree, even when they disagree on many positions. Gandhi and Tagore revered one another. It was Tagore who conferred on Gandhi the title of Mahatma, the great soul in the dark garb, Tagore said. Gandhi called Tagore the great sentinel and the poet. In their letters, they discussed very different paths for that emancipation that would put an end to one of the largest experiences of colonialism. For Gandhi, that freedom was going to be achieved through the creation of India, a nation founded on the ancestral shared values of the Indian people, a return to an original path disrupted for centuries of colonial rule. For Tagore, the path was quite the opposite, the liberation from that past and the engagement in the internationalism of one single world, with no borders and no political or economic barriers. From today's vantage, it's easy to see in their correspondence the seeds of the debate for the 21st century between nationalism and globalization. What Gandhi tried to explain to Tagore in the decades leading to the Pacific struggle for liberation was his need as a leader to free and to protect his people. For nationalism offered not only liberation from the colonial past to millions, it offered also a shelter against the invisible forces that ravaged their land, destroyed their villages, took their language. It offered the memory of the undisturbed world of the distaff and the coast and the Great Valley and the tightly knit community and the direct contact and the shared values and the conscience. Romanticized as it might sound, the nationalistic narrative embraced by Gandhi was more than delusion. For in the name of the nation, people go to war and kill each other. But it is also in the name of the nation that people also demand better salaries, march for their freedom, claim for their rights. It is also in the name of belonging to a nation that people in India and elsewhere advocate for new rules and egalitarian treatment and demand authorities to defend their human integrity and dignity. It was out of this nation created by the Gandhis of the world that this institution, where we are today, was created as a community of nations, local nations with universal mandates. Where do we stand today when 900 million people suffer hunger? How can we break the cynicism of deciding that war against war is the best way to achieve peace? How are we to imagine and concrete the universalization of freedom, dignity, and peace? Dear friends, an Argentine writer says that letters are the utopian form of the conversation. To write a letter is to send a message to the future. Perhaps, if we hear once again at the poet and the Mahatma, we would find with those roses the rose to walk together towards a better future for all. Tagore wrote, "Let me know that all pain and death are shadows of the moment. The truth is not on the side of the one who shouts the loudest." And Gandhi said, if we are to make progress, we must not repeat history, but make new history. Terrorism and deception are weapons not of the strong, but of the weak. Power based on love is 1,000 times more effective and permanent than the one derived from fear of punishment. There are many causes that I am prepared to die for, but no causes that I am prepared to kill for. Thank you.
I would like to thank Ambassador Perceval for very, very interesting remarks and for the gift of a rose to each one of us on the dais, on which it is inscribed, "The truth, it is not on the side of the one who shouts the loudest." Thank you, Ambassador, for this gift. I now recognize the distinguished Ambassador of the Czech Republic, the land of Václav Havel, to say a few words. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for my country, the Czech Republic, and myself to commemorate with all of you Mahatma Gandhi and the International Day of Nonviolence. In our history, many Czechs were fascinated by Mahatma Gandhi's charisma and his highest moral standards, by how he always put his personality and an individual example into his engagements. And precisely this was something that caused to then our communist regime great problems, because this regime tried to drown all the individuality, even its own, in the respective communist ideology. Mahatma Gandhi was therefore for many years presented in my country only as a fighter against colonization and advocate of the poorest. His thoughts about human rights, faith, and religious tolerance were largely played down. Interestingly, the first unbiased book about Mahatma Gandhi, without any visible interventions of communist censorship, appeared in Czechoslovak bookstores shelves in early 1989. And it is also very symbolic that the first motto of the Czech Velvet Revolution has become a chant of students encircled by the police forces in the Prague National Street on November 17, 1989. We have bare hands. During that very evening, still, the force defeated the idea. And those who had no bare hands, who bore arms, surely enjoyed their victory. But they certainly did know it was their last one. After a week in the streets, there was such a mass of people that scared not only the police, but even the army was afraid. And this is the momentum when the power of the powerless was changing into the helplessness of those in power. I must recall this moment the ideological father of Charter 77, who in his theoretical studies referred to Mahatma Gandhi. On the occasion of his death, Václav Havel wrote the most important political essay, Power of the Powerless, which became the ideological basis for the formation of dissident structures, and their fight, and mainly their personal example, led Czechs to a peaceful transition to democracy. Maybe this is the most interesting fact regarding to personalities like Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, in our case, Václav Havel, and many others. As if their engagement, that at the beginning seems futile to everybody, had been transformed by their personal authority into a force that led to destruction of the dominant power. They were able to walk even when they went by themselves. The inner strength was much more internally enforced than not only of their opponents, but their supporters observed at the time. It was based in a great power of personal knowledge and education, and multiplied by huge human humility and personal courage. At the moment when their opponents restricted their personal freedom, they did the worst thing they could, because from the prison returned even stronger adversaries who accepted every turn of their fate as a challenge. Václav Havel was awarded by the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Prize in 2004, and he said in New Delhi during the ceremony, "Each and every one of us must look within ourselves, and however insignificant our influence on the general march of events may seem to be, strive to contend with both seen and unseen threats to the world." This is the eternal fresh message of Mahatma's long life, work, and activity. They are men that by authority of their personalities exceeded their nations to raise the world. Sometimes it happens, and it is strange, that at the moment when they begin to understand the world, a part of their nation ceases to understand them. They are connected by absolute respect for the truth and for the willingness to endure sacrifice because of it. Men who are willing to die for the truth are particularly needed at a time when it seems that the truth is losing its value. The truth and the love do not always automatically create the goodness, but the lies and hatred automatically generate malefice. And evil bears violence no matter on which side of the barricade. Let us then celebrate every single day without violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Edita, for that very moving intervention. And my final request from the floor is from the Distinguished Ambassador of Norway, the host country of the Nobel Peace Prize, to take the floor. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, by mentioning the Peace Prize, I think you mentioned the one thing that we are indeed very embarrassed of, and that is that the one man who more than anyone else deserved the Peace Prize actually did not get it. Don't blame me, don't blame the Norwegian politicians, blame the committee that existed at the time. But I think what happened was that the committee later understood that it failed gravely. And all those leaders who have been inspired by Gandhi, one after one, and they've all been mentioned here today, they indeed have received the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think that pays a tribute to Gandhi himself. Let me start by also quoting something which I think is the essence of what we have learned from Gandhi and the other leaders. And let me quote. Non-violent action is a technique by which people who reject passivity and submission and who see struggle as essential can wage the conflict without violence. Non-violent action is not an attempt to avoid or ignore conflict. It is one response to the problem of how to act effectively in politics, especially how to wield powers effectively. And indeed, throughout his life, Gandhi remained committed to this belief in non-violence, even under oppressive conditions and in the face of seemingly unsurmountable challenges, as we have heard many times. Through mass mobilization and non-violent action, Gandhi fought for justice, dignity, independence, and peace. While Gandhi helped gain the independence of India and inspired and influenced the struggle for freedom elsewhere, today we can draw inspiration from him in our struggle against poverty, exploitation, in our struggle for dignity and justice, in our struggle for human rights, and not the least in our struggle against discrimination, hate speech, and intolerance. Every day, serious instances of intolerance and discrimination affect different people, be it based on their actual or perceived nationality, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or disability. This is unacceptable. My dear friends, we are continuing this fight, and in continuing the fight, we are counting on India's leadership, and I can guarantee you our full support. Thank you.
I thank my colleague, Distinguished Ambassador of Norway, for his remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Secretary General of the United Nations would now have to leave us. He has another pressing engagement. But before he does that, Mr. Secretary General, on behalf of all of us gathered here, as well as on behalf of the Permanent Mission of India, I would like to present a special limited edition of a book on Mahatma Gandhi for your personal collection. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now request one of our most distinguished artist from Mumbai in India, Mr. R.D. Parekh, who has painted this life-size portrait of the Mahatma, to come up on the podium, to the dais, to present it to the office of the President of the General Assembly, Ambassador Sean Ash. So, Mr. Parekh, please come. Well, friends, if you just take your seats, and we move now to that part of our program today, which many of us have been most eagerly looking forward to. It is my privilege to invite onto the stage the great Indian artist and exponent of the Sarod, Ustad Amjad Ali Khan, and his highly talented sons, Aman and Ayan, for a special rendition that they have dedicated to the Mahatma and the International Day of Nonviolence. I would request the distinguished President of the General Assembly to come down from the stage with me so that we can take our seats in the audience to listen to the program.
नहीं हुआ राउंड वो तो देर से ये कर रहा था ये बैठ
सर राउंड तो है यहाँ हो गया कॉपी नहीं हो रहा एक्टिव नहीं हो रहा
इसको उस समय कौन बनाया हाँ अरे कौन बनाया
उस समय
जब एक काम एक करना ना उसको काम जरूर करना घूमो मत भूलना बीमारी से चलता भी है इसमें ऐसे नहीं होना तो किसी दूसरा से करेगा
It's a great honor and privilege for all of us to share our music and remember all the great people who gave their life for the message of non-violence. Our family is committed to peace and harmony. Our country is committed to peace and harmony. And the songs which we are going to present, they were a great favorite of Mahatma Gandhi. I'll begin the composition with a composition created by great poet Rabindranath Tagore, and they are all based on Rag, Khamaj, Mishrigara, and folk music of Bengal. I would like to introduce my tabla players Vinit Vyas and Salar Nadir. On my right is my elder son Aman Ali Khan and Ayan Ali Khan, 2 years younger. I feel happy to be their father and guru, but the most important role has been played by their mother, and I feel every mother is the first guru of every child. My wife Subhalakshmi Barua from Assam is their mother. So we'll begin the recital with Vaishnav Janako and Brahma. Thank you very much.